As investors grapple with concerns about new tariffs, U.S. stocks lost around $3 trillion in market value on Thursday, the largest one-day decline in 5 years. But President Trump says the market will boom just like a patient will heal after an operation. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
I think it's going very well.
Despite stocks plunging on Thursday, President Trump tells us he's optimistic about the market and the country.
It was an operation. Like when a patient gets operated on, the markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
The Dow fell over 1,600 points on Thursday as all three major market indexes posted their worst day since 2020. Companies with production lines in countries like China are hit the hardest, with Apple losing around $300 billion or over 9% of its market value. The sell-off comes after Trump announced on Wednesday a 10% baseline tariff on all countries and higher reciprocal tariffs on countries he says are treating the U.S. especially unfairly in trade.
They do it to us and we do it to them.
And while some are warning of higher prices,
because of the crippling Trump tariff tax.
The White House press secretary says the president will bring down the cost of living through
massive deregulation, an energy boom, and tax cuts.
And as some farmers are expected to be impacted by tariffs, the agriculture secretary promises relief.
We are setting up the infrastructure that if in fact we have some economic consequences in the short term to our farmers and perhaps our ranchers, that we will have programs in place to solve for that.
Trump's new 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars and parts also went into effect on Thursday. The White House touting reactions by some automakers, Ford offering American buyers discount pricing, General Motors increasing truck production in Indiana, and Stellantis now pausing production at some of its Canadian and Mexican plants. And all this happening as companies are adjusting to President Trump's new tariffs aimed at bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Countries from around the world are responding to President Trump's new tariffs. Some say they're happy, while others are preparing countermeasures. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the details on how different countries are reacting.
Canada's Prime Minister on Thursday responding to the tariffs announced by President Trump. Prime Minister Mark Carney is announcing a tariff on American vehicles.
I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement.
Carney also says the new tariffs won't apply to auto parts and won't affect vehicle content from Mexico. He previously announced that retaliatory tariffs will remain in effect. Carney also says that Canada will fight the U.S. tariffs until they're lifted. Mexico, meanwhile, celebrating that it's being excluded from the new general tariffs. Mexico's president also expresses satisfaction that the North American Free Trade Agreement will remain in force.
My understanding is that there wouldn't be tariffs on Mexico because Mexico doesn't place tariffs on the United States. There are no additional tariffs, not even for Canada, although in the case of Canada, there are a few in some specific areas.
The Trump administration is keeping the tariffs it imposed on Mexico earlier this year. Those are being tied to Mexico tackling security issues, such as illegal fentanyl trafficking. And Argentina's government is also expressing satisfaction with Trump's decision to impose lower tariffs on goods from Argentina.
President Milei said he was satisfied with having achieved the cheapest rates. We know about the excellent relationship we have with the United States. Our objective is to sign a free trade agreement.
China, however, is urging the U.S. to cancel its latest tariffs immediately. The Chinese regime is threatening retaliation if the U.S. doesn't lift the tariffs. And the European Union saying this on Thursday.
We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel. And we're now preparing for further countermeasures.
And France, which is part of the EU, says the new tariffs will mostly affect the American economy.
The American economy and the American people will come out of this weaker and poorer than yesterday.
But while announcing possible countermeasures, the European Commission president added that she does agree with President Trump that some countries have been using trade rules to take unfair advantage of the U.S. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
So what are some of the results that will come from President Trump's new reciprocal tariffs? To discuss, we have on Charles Benoit. He's a trade counsel for the Coalition for a Prosperous America. All right, Charles, thanks for taking the time with us today. Let's start with a clip from Vice President J.D. Vance on the sweeping reciprocal tariffs from the White House. Listen in for a minute.
For 40 years, we've had an economy that rewards people who ship American jobs overseas and raises taxes on American workers, and we're flipping that on its head. We're going to cut taxes for American workers and for American companies that build here. We're going to make it harder to ship American jobs overseas. It's a total shift in the way that we've done economic policy in the United States of America.
Charles, could you explain for us how this is a total shift in economic policy? And also, why do you think Trump essentially wants to revert back to the trade status we had in the 1930s?
Sure. Well, so that's exactly right. The only thing I would correct the vice president on there was it's been longer than 4 decades. You're right to go back to the World War II era. So that's when in 1934, Congress sort of handed over the reins to the president. We've been in the presidential tariff era ever since. I call it 1934 year zero. But one of the mistakes that every single president has made up until Donald Trump was to accept non-reciprocity. So there's something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. A lot of people have heard of it, the GATT. And that's kind of like the constitution that the WTO oversees. And under the GATT, every country kind of pledges maximum tariff rates across 5,000 product categories. We'd given up the most, and we'd never gotten any kind of reciprocity from most countries. We had nibbled here and there, and we'd managed to get Japan to basically come down to our tariff rates, but then they found other ways to just not buy our stuff. So that's the jig was up. It was time, and the president was with the American, his broad American support to do what he did.
And with that being said, both the vice president and the president have noted that positive changes won't happen overnight. This is going to take some time. It seems like right now many are wanting to see immediate gratification in the prices. How long do you think Americans should expect to wait for results?
Well, so there's 2 things we're going to get positive results on. Federal revenue to use to offset domestic taxes, and I expect that this year. And then the protection element, so more jobs and more domestic investment. So we're already seeing tons of new greenfield investment. The president has done a lot to lay that out, so that's really encouraging. And then a big thing to pay attention to is the capacity utilization rate. So they point out our auto plants are only at 60% capacity. So a lot of people, a lot of people won't necessarily be aware of that benefit, but rising tide lifts all boats, drives wages up. And so, yeah, you'll see. I think it'll be sooner than not. The president had a highly successful washing machine tariff in his first term. That was a 20% tariff on all washing machines up to 1.2 million, and then a 50% tariff on any subsequent washing machine imports. And that got LG and Samsung to invest over $1 billion in new factories in South Carolina and Tennessee. And so again, does every American immediately feel that? No. But there's some people who them and their families and their communities it's going to be game changing and a tremendous relief. And then likewise, I think that what other thing people should pay attention to is maybe $600 billion a year in new revenue that can pay for no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, which a massive amount of the American population will feel.
And now, Charles, Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller recently spoke about why these tariffs are a matter of national security, not just the economy. Let's together listen into what Stephen Miller had to say.
So if you look at America today, we're totally dependent on foreign countries for the supplies that make this country run, for all of the essential goods, materials, manufactured products that make it possible for us to live our lives. Our cars, our electronics, all the materials that go into our homes, our buildings, our medical supplies, our entire supply chains are completely embedded in foreign countries. So if there's a national emergency of any kind, and a country shuts off an import or a foreign power embargoes a sea lane, we are then left defenseless, helpless.
Now, Trump declared a national emergency over this, of course. Charles, talk to us about how serious this is.
Well, I think most Americans lived through this, right, with COVID and supply chain interruptions. I I think that a lot of people don't appreciate with food now. We can't even feed ourselves. We're a net importer of food, and even just looking at that actually masks the fact that what we really grow are refined carbohydrates. But if you want protein, fat, or fiber, we're wildly import dependent. And so I'm talking from Western ranchers. U.S. lamb at this point might be gone from U.S. grocery stores within the decade. To fruit and vegetables. I'm down in Florida, and it's a catastrophe. The iconic staples, Florida oranges, disappearing. So we definitely need. The case is clear. What President Trump is doing is historic because we had to learn this once prior in our history, and it was a long time ago. And it was at the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars, and Jefferson. We probably all vaguely remember hearing about the Embargo Acts, right? That's something we all kind of learned about in school. Well, that was the event. At the end of that War of 1812, we had the Tariff Act of 1816, and we basically enjoyed protective tariffs for a century, built self-reliance the hard way, and then through the 20th century and into this century, we've been spending that down.
What other impacts are there of goods being made in America? Yeah,
well, that's an excellent question. That's an excellent point. Globalization is not about more competition. It's about global consolidation. Right? We were down to there's one factory left in the world that makes microwaves, that kind of thing. China's overcapacity drives globalization around the world, whether it's in steel or automotive. And I'm quoting the CEO of Ford saying that. So globalization is actually reducing competition. I know it's counterintuitive, but we don't live in a 17th century world of all artisan merchants trading things. Capital moves across borders very freely. We're not doing anything. We're not restricting capital. If you can make a better widget, you are welcome to, you can set up an LLC in America like that and get started and invest here and build here and compete in our market by paying American wages. So I think that you're going to see a lot more competition as capacity and across manufacturing expands, especially in this country. And that's going to be a good thing for prices and innovation in the long run.
All right, Charles, thanks for breaking it all down for us. We appreciate having you on the show tonight.
Anytime. Thanks so much.
And in Congress, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held its confirmation hearing for David Perdue to be the next ambassador to China. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Marxist nationalism is reshaping China, and their global ambitions threaten the current world order. Put simply, they want a world order more in line with their authoritarian principles.
David Perdue, a former senator from the state of Ohio, gave testimony before lawmakers he served with. Despite niceties, Democrats immediately pressed Senator Perdue on the Trump administration's policy towards U.S. allies vis-a-vis China.
Leadership is questioned in the world by our allies and those we have stood alongside. I think by the same logic, Xi will inevitably be emboldened to believe that he can take on his vision to reacquire Taiwan, the Philippines, the South China Sea.
Withdrawal is not an option for the United States. I don't think President Trump is attempting to do that. I think by reaching and stepping forward in the area of trade addresses some of the questions that you bring up there. Our allies, we have to align and make sure they understand the threat and develop a cohesive strategy.
Senator Rick Scott, the Republican from Florida, highlighted the human rights abuses of the CCP and in particular the persecution of religious groups internationally, including Falun Gong practitioners.
So the Communist Party sends fentanyl into the United States, killed 78,000 people last year. They treat the Uyghurs horribly. They don't follow any trade rules. They never comply with the WTO. It's a despicable government.
Our support of China over the last 30 years or more, also the violations in the World Trade Organization we've turned a blind eye to, those days are over, I believe, and I think we've got to stand up.
Senator Scott pressed Senator Perdue on the impact of U.S. tariffs on China and the economic relations in between both countries.
But if we stop buying their stuff, what will happen?
Well, if foreign capital from the U.S. stops going into China, they have a real problem.
If we stop buying their product, what will happen?
Well,
if the American public says enough's enough, what will happen to their economy?
It'll collapse.
Right. Thank you.
Senator Perdue served one term in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and in the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was endorsed by President Trump back in 2021 when he attempted to become the next governor of Georgia, and he's expected to be confirmed by the Senate to be the next U.S. ambassador to China in the coming week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.